Good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m. So we're going to start the webinar. My name is Sophia Perez. I'm the Program Officer for the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. We have with us today Hannah Chuuk. Hannah, thank you so much for being here today. She's going to be our presenter. And yeah, thank you to everyone, all of our attendees who are here. As you're probably aware, October is Humanities Month here in the CNMI, and we at the Humanities Council are celebrating by holding 2 Zoom webinars every Friday of the month at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., each featuring a different humanities topic. So this morning, Hannah Chuuk is going to talk to us about food insecurity on Guam and how the Chuukese community has been responding to that while upholding their traditions and their cultural values. To the attendees, please note that you will be muted for the duration of the presentation and will be asked to save any chat messages for after the presentation, during which there will be a question and answer period until we close out the hour. Depending on the number of questions, we may unmute attendees for this portion, or simply just use a moderator to relay questions. So if you do have questions or anything, please send it to me privately in the chat. And then for those of you tuning in on Facebook Live, you can send your questions by messaging the Northern Marianas Humanities Council Facebook page. Oh, shoot, let me just make sure that we're live on Facebook. Okay, we're rolling. Okay, so yeah, without further ado, I'm just gonna hand the floor over to Miss Hannah. And yeah, thank you so much for being here, Hannah, go ahead.
Right. Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you so much, Sophia, for introducing me, and a big thank you to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council for inviting me to do this webinar and also letting me take part in the festivities of Humanities Month. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get the ball rolling. All right, I hope everyone can see this. So I was invited to present on my graduate thesis research that I completed of May of this year. And I studied the adaptive strategies to food insecurity within the Chuukese community of Guam. So first of all, what is food insecurity, right? So the USDA defines food insecurity as the reduced quality, variety, or desirability of dietary decisions with indications of disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. So it could also include like the availability of nutritional foods, the amount of time spent between being hungry and having food to eat, and ways of obtaining foods. So food security is very complex because almost every aspect of one's lifestyle can affect how and if one can eat, right? So this is where adaptive strategies come into play. So adaptive strategies are defined as the long-term coping mechanisms to food insecurity that can range from simple changes in eating patterns to more severe changes in diet and nutrition. So the nutritional and the emotional impacts of food insecurity are well researched. It has been associated with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and obesity, especially in low-income adults. A food environment that includes fewer healthy food options, but more low-quality food presents more physical barriers to healthy eating. And food insecurity can also lead to mental and emotional difficulties like suicidal tendencies and depressive disorders. So here I just have a list of a few common obstacles to obtaining food that have been defined and researched by similar studies conducted in the mainland US. So just reading off of this list, some of these common obstacles include like lack of reliable transportation, financial trouble is a big one, lack of safety near certain food environments. That's where the environmental and physical barriers come into play. Poverty and substance abuse are also common obstacles. So here is just a list of the common adaptive strategies that have been defined by those similar studies conducted in the mainland. And these common adaptive strategies have been grouped into 5 main themes. So we have the first one, which is optimizing, and that's when participants make use of the food or resources that they already had with them that they previously acquired. The second one is settling, and that's when participants are without resources to begin with, and they must settle with whatever they can find or whatever is available. We have advocacy, and that's when participants try to actively pursue change in their food environments. We have proactivity, which includes the personal changes one makes to increase their own food security, and these are personal changes that they make, to themselves and how they conduct themselves. And then finally, we have illegal acquisition, which is pretty self-explanatory. So why is this important for Guam, and what can be benefited from this type of study? So there are a lot of food security related studies conducted on Guam, but majority of them primarily focus on diet, right? So none really focus primarily on adaptive strategies themselves. And adaptive strategies can not only measure food insecurity, but they can also describe the experiences and the trauma behind hunger. So nowadays, the modern Chuukese diet is kind of characterized by being highly dependent on rice, flour, sugar, and other fatty foods. And that in turn has led to increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and obesity. So a complete return to traditional food habits is kind of considered unfeasible by certain studies, given the rise of Western values and land shortages. So on top of that, new food tastes tend to devalue traditional foods, or the preference for traditional foods, especially among those who are affluent. So these are just the objectives of my study. The first one was what are the traditional adaptive strategies utilized in Chuuk? The second was what are the adaptive strategies to food insecurity currently in use within the Chuukese community residing in Guam? And third, how can these strategies be better incorporated in government and NGO education and support programs to address current issues with food insecurity within the study community, the Chuukese community? So this study was done in 2 separate phases. The first phase was more quantitative, and it made use of the USDA 18-item household food insecurity survey. The USDA offers a couple of food insecurity surveys, and you can kind of cater what survey you'd like to use for your own research, depending on what you're looking for and how much information you're looking for. So the 18-item one was the most comprehensive, and it really explored experiences and even trauma and just the overall experience of hunger. So this survey, or this phase, was really just used to help us identify who is food insecure, right? Because that's kind of hard to measure without like a standardized measurement tool. So this just helped us see what individuals or what households can be considered food insecure on like a nationally recognized level. So the table on the right just shows like the preliminary results to this phase, the survey phase. I surveyed a total of 66 individuals, and here we can see the breakdown of who measured at being food secure. So they were not food insecure, but they were able to have enough food to eat and didn't really experience hunger all that much. And then the second level, we could see we had 35 individuals who measured at being food insecure without hunger. We had 10 individuals who measured at being food insecure with moderate hunger. And then the most severe, level of food insecurity is called food insecure with severe hunger. And this particular level is reserved for households with children. So that's why there's that little asterisk there. I hope that's not too confusing. So the food insecure with moderate hunger and food insecure with severe hunger, they're kind of related in that the individuals who have moderate hunger could very well be on the same level as those with severe hunger. It's just that they don't have children living in their households. So it's from this group that I was able to form a sample group, a sample pool for the second phase, which was more qualitative. And this is where my interviews came in hand. So qualitative research strives to understand not only the experiences of a certain population, but also the assumptions and the attitudes behind certain behaviors. So it's great for getting into the nitty-gritty of the experience or phenomenon that you're trying to study. These interviews were transcribed and coded to mark certain behaviors, experiences, opinions, and things like that. So I was able to interview a total of 9 individuals from this group. So here we just have a quick rundown of the demographics of my participants. We have their pseudonym because my interviews were anonymous. We have whether or not they were from, or if they were from the main or outer islands in Chuuk. We have the gender they identified with, their age range, the number of people within their household, and then their level of food insecurity. So we can see we have a good mix of those who were food insecure without hunger, food insecure with moderate hunger, and then those who were food insecure with severe hunger. So those are the households that had children within them. And this is how I made sure that we had a good mix of participants who could offer the largest array of insights, per se. So this is just a breakdown of my interview guide. I hope my contrast isn't too bad, but the boxes highlighted in yellow or orange are the 5 main questions, and under those were probes. So my interviews were semi-structured, and that just means even though I did have an interview guide, we were free to explore different topics and discuss various things while still keeping into the theme of what I was trying to explore. Excuse me. So here I just have a snapshot of how my analysis went for interviews. I just wanted to give everyone an example of how this was done, and I was using a qualitative research coding program. So this is what shows up when I transcribe interviews. So for qualitative research, analysis starts with a process of taking like important words, phrases, opinions, taking them out of their original context of the interviews while still making sure they retain their original meaning. And then after that, you kind of give them a new sort of context within the studies framework, within the frame of the studies theme. So I just wanted to show how this process looked. So on the left, that big chunk of text, that's a section of an interview that I did. And this participant was describing a time when she was in her home island in Chuuk, and they were preparing for a big party, and they had family members coming from all over the place. It was a very, celebratory, fun time. But then when it came time for their visitors and their family members to leave, I believe something went wrong with the boats that were supposed to take them, and it ended up being that these visitors stayed for up to months at a time. And she was describing how difficult it was for her family to provide for them because they felt that was their responsibility, right? They had people coming into their household, and she was just describing, the hardships of that and what she had to go through and what they had to sacrifice in order to make sure everyone was fed. And then the left or the right portion of this box is just like preliminary codes that were formed from the interview. So this is how we take sections of an interview and we take it out of its original context, but it still retains a meaning. So it's from these codes that themes were formed, and that what forms the bulk of my findings. So 4 distinct categories of themes from the codes that were done from the interviews. These 4 themes revolving around food insecurity and adaptive strategies were found. So these 4 categories are optimizing resources outside the household, cash economy, entrepreneurship, and managing food supply. And I'll go through each one individually. So the first category is called optimizing resources outside the household. Now this figure here shows the main theme highlighted on the right, optimizing resources outside the household. And then to the left of that, or branching out of that, are 2 subcategories. And then branching out of those 2 to the far left are the actual codes that were used from the interviews or formed from the interviews. And it's important to note here that not all of these codes are actual adaptive strategies. Like some of them could just express opinions or perspectives that really help define the participants' experiences. So to get back to the main category, optimizing resources outside the household, these strategies required participants to use certain resource pools that were readily available to them. And they also entail the active pursuit to obtain food or the resources. So the first subcategory under the overall theme of optimizing resources is called local food abundant in Chuuk. So the strategies under this subcategory are subsistence, farming, gathering, foraging, and fishing. So these strategies in particular come directly from Chuukese subsistence culture, but they were also described by participants as being kind of difficult to achieve on Guam, and many attributed that difficulty to the overall lack of access to like environmental resources, which then again highlights the differences of what is available in their home islands in Chuuk and what is available to them in Guam. So this subcategory, local food abundant in Chuuk, was named so because participants noted that their local food, which was almost always local produce, was practically free in their home islands, unlike Guam, where it either was expensive or the effort they had to put in to obtain that food was stark difference. Excuse me. So here we just have a few examples of the quotes that were used to support the strategies within the optimizing resources theme. So unfortunately, my participants really relied on the anonymity factor of my interviews. So being able to play the audio of their interviews was kind of a no-go. So I'm just going to be reading off these, and I hope I do them justice. So at the top, Marianne says, they will go and fish, they will go and looking around, breadfruit they will get from higher, they will get down, they will get some banana everywhere and papaya, any kind of food they will go and get. And she is referring to her home island and how they were able to get food from practically everywhere, right? Because of how available it was. And Layla under her says, because back home we plant our own food. We cut the taro, the breadfruit, and then we fix it. And here they have to pay for it because you don't have land. And I feel like it would be easier if, we have our land here. So she's really echoing that lack of resources that they kind of have to contend with. So the second subcategory under the optimizing resources theme is called external aid, and it includes strategies that use family or community networks. So the strategies under this subcategory include asking others for aid for mostly food and money, gifting and sharing, charity through church groups, and participating in government programs. So here again, we have a couple of quotes that express the strategies within this external aid category. Again, I'll just read them out. Up top, we have Keisha, who explains when they don't have food, sometimes calling relatives and ask for help, or like, do you have extra rice? Can I get a few cups or a pack of chicken? Yeah, because even salt, hey, do you have extra salt? And then below her, Robert says, when I don't have enough money for payday or after you pay your rent, because sometimes we're in that kind of situation, we have families here, so we can call and ask, can I have money for this? And then Epit at the bottom says, well, I think she was trying to describe the differences between the resource pools in Chuuk and Guam. She says, no, I think in Chuuk they still, but maybe here like less, because we have plenty things to do, like plenty to do. That's why in Chuuk they still, but here I don't think we have enough to share. So the second theme that was formed from the study is called cash economy. The strategies under this theme describes the participants' food insecurity strictly due to Guam's cash economy. So the difficulties they described with this type of economy were almost always followed by memories of subsistence agriculture and subsistence practices in their home islands, and how much they not only preferred the subsistence practices, but how much it really helped them to stay fulfilled. So the first subcategory under the cash economy theme is called lowering food costs, and it includes strategies that help lower the overall cost of food. So for example, participants were often preferred or sometimes were forced to purchase cheaper foods when shopping. These foods included like canned goods, canned meat, chicken leg quarters, rice, and like packaged ramen. Participants also had like this process where they would compare food prices at different stores, which would require them to travel to different stores to find out these prices in order to get the best deal at the cheapest price. And because of the demands of a cash economy, affordability is really key. So here again, we have a few quotes that were used to describe the strategies that lower the food cost, as well as the difficulties of navigating Guam's cash economy. So Sally up top just said it's hard because if I worked, I have food because I go buy, but in Chuuk, free. So I went to the jungle, I picked the stock, but over here, hard because we eat with money, we stay with money, we go on the road with money, everything money, but in Chuuk, free. And then Robert under her says, bag of rice is what, 25, 26? And if you get that, 3 or 2 kon, and for those who don't know, kon is a local Chuukese dish that's made with breadfruit. And he goes on to say, sometimes they sell $5, $6, but the 50-pound rice for 2 weeks, 1 week, and it's everybody share the rice. And then Amelia at the end just simply states, I mostly live off of canned goods because that's what we can afford. Excuse me. So the second subcategory under the cash economy theme is called access to traditional or local Chuukese food in Guam. So codes under this subcategory are not necessarily strategies, but they do describe the perceptions of local Chuukese food that is sold within Guam's cash economy. Because all my participants described how expensive the local Chuukese food here is in Guam in comparison to Chuuk. So 2 main reasons are given for this. First, it's the overall lack of like tools needed to make this type of food. And the second is just, it's really expensive ingredients. So this is significant The sentiment is significant in the fact that many participants noted how they would actually prefer to eat local Chuukese food, which is often a little more nutritious than the cheaper foods that they usually are prefer to buy in stores and things like that. But even obtaining this more nutritious food is it's hard here on Guam. So here we have a couple quotes that express the participants' opinions on how expensive the local Chuukese food here is on Guam, which really emphasizes, our cash economy's impact on Chuukese subsistence culture. So Sally at the top says, yes, I really miss, but if I want the local food from here, expensive. They sell very expensive. The small pounding corn in Chuuk, they sell that $2. From those, they don't even have plant. So over here, they sell very small, only one person, only 2, 3. We eat 3 times. They sell $7, $8. And then Amelia under her says, but it's also crazy though, how much they sell it here. And the portion they sell it here, because it's crazy. So you could get pounded breadfruit the size of the folded paper for what, $8 on Guam. But you could buy, I think she was trying to say at the side of the road, the size of a plastic bag in Chuuk for that same price. So that's crazy. So the third category or main theme category is called entrepreneurship. And it's much more straightforward than the other categories in which participants literally apply entrepreneurial skills to get more money or food into the household. So the first subcategory under that is called the barter system. And it's a very strategic process, this barter system, and it involves the exchange of coolers between Guam and Chuuk. So participants pack coolers full of low-value Western food items. So these are chips, canned goods, and things like that. And in exchange for those coolers, they get in return coolers packed in Chuuk full of the local Chuukese food, which is of high value here in Guam. And it makes use of those existing networks while also taking advantage of the fact that what is considered low value here is considered low value there and vice versa. So it's a really smart system. So here we have a couple quotes that explain this, this barter system. Lorna up top says, so we ask our dad to go to Chuuk so he can get us local food. If my sister needs something, and her sister stays in Chuuk, then my sisters and my brothers, we have to get the cooler, put stuff, whatever she wants, like chips, pancakes, the pancake mix, canned meat for her kids, in the cooler. You can bring 2 coolers, 1 for fish and 1 for only the local food. And Lorna in particular was really great at explaining this barter system in a really easy to understand and personable way, because I believe her father travels frequently, or used to, right before the pandemic, between Guam and Chuuk. And her family would get very excited whenever he planned to travel back and forth. And she was explaining to me they would get everything ready, pack everything so he's good to go. And then I realized she meant he was good to go in terms of the coolers, but his own his own personal baggage, clothes, and everything he had to deal with. But they got the coolers down. To continue on with this, Sally after her says, if I'm gonna go to Chuuk, oh, you going to Chuuk tomorrow? And I say yes. Oh, can I pay the $50 for 1 cooler and you bring it to my family? And I go, oh, okay, no problem. So you pay the cooler, I check my name, I bring to Chuuk. So you call your family to go to the airport, look for me there. So she was describing more of the process of how that happens. So the second subcategory under the entrepreneurship theme is called extra money for the household. And this includes selling handicrafts or offering different types of services to rake in that little extra cash for the household. So here we have a couple of quotes that support the entrepreneurship or the extra money for household subcategory. We have Keisha up top that says, And then me, for example, I'm making the marmar, the lei. So I made it out of the foam sheets and then I will sell it. I do that and like it comes really good on hand because sometimes when I need water, money for water, it helps also. And then treaty explains sometimes when there's people that come to me and asking for help, like massage. Yeah, I massage them and they give me some cash. So that's what I use to pay my meal. And that's one of the services that was described were these massages that she does. And then Marianne at the bottom describes they make some handicraft to sell and then they have money and they buy food. You know, the clothes, the sewing clothes, they make some mat from their own hands. They make. So the final theme category is called managing food supply, and this includes strategies that help participants manage their existing food supply. So what they have on hand and how to maximize that. So the first subcategory is called stretching food, and these involve strategies that maximize food servings while also limiting the amount and the type of ingredients that go into these servings. So some of these strategies include like various cooking methods or even special recipes. And one particular method that was described multiple times is the use of soup. And this is where participants would add water to rice and like other ingredients such as like canned mackerel and even like sugar. And they would create a soup that can be shared among multiple household members while also limiting the amount of ingredients that went into this dish. So this strategy is also considered kind of cultural because participants also use this particular strategy of soup in their home islands when they experienced times of food shortage there. But of course, you kind of have to note that this type of dilution of meals comes with its own nutritional implications. So other strategies under stretching food include eating specific foods to curb hunger or making use of leftovers. So here we have a couple of quotes that describe the strategies that stretch food. Sally says, "We just use our custom. If we don't have meat, we just get the rice, put the water, put sugar, like soup. So we just mix it and eat, no meat. Because if they don't have meat, we cannot feel like, just eat straight the rice. So we put the water inside the cooked rice, we make it soft, put the sugar, mix it with the sugar, and then that's all. We feel like it tastes good to eat. Like we already had meat with the rice, but no, it's only water and sugar." So Sally was the one that described adding sugar to better the taste because, if you don't have a meal with meat, then is it really a meal, right? Us islanders. So Layla under that describes, sometimes we would only eat something from our fridge, eat soft drink, just drinks. We don't have time to go to the store to ask somebody to come and we'll just, try to grab something and just munch on it just to have energy throughout the day. And then Keisha at the end describes leftovers. So she says, whatever's the leftover, we will just preheat and eat. So sometimes when her mother goes to work, sometimes she comes home with some leftover food and what they ate at work, and that's what we will eat. So the final subcategory under the managing food supply theme is called portioning food. And this is a process in which participants calculate how much food they must eat or save until the next time they have enough money to buy more food. And it also includes how they portion servings among different household members. So an example of this would be when participants calculate the amount of servings within a 50-pound bag of rice and how much that will last until the next payday when they are able to buy more. So these portions were called food budgets by many of the participants. So we were going to use that term, food budget. Participants also described purchasing bulk foods in order to make portioning easier. And during times of shortages, participants described how certain members within the household, like children, elders, and even visitors, were given special consideration. That means if there wasn't enough food to go around, then the household members that weren't either children, elders, or visitors would either limit their own food portions or refrain from eating at all, just to make sure everyone else was able to eat. So here we have a couple of quotes that describe the process of portioning food, or the use of portioning food. So Treaty says, I just cook whatever is enough for me for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't cook that much. If it's fish, I just fry half during cooking. Layla said, like, we just eat ramen because usually that's what we get, because, you know, like box of ramen, so it can last more than 2 weeks. And then Sally at the end says, because I cannot eat without my dad. So if we have like very small amount of food, I cannot eat, like only me, my kids, and my boyfriend. And I go, oh, never mind, because my dad is very strong. No, I share it because I really love my dad. To just, you know, whatever me and my kids and my boyfriend eat, we just share with my dad. So from the findings of this study, it was apparent that any recommendations that were to form to increase food security within the study community should be based on agricultural practices, or should be agricultural in nature. Because subsistence practices like farming, foraging, gathering, fishing, they were not only described by participants as being common in their home islands, but they were also their preferred ways of obtaining food while on Guam. However, due to like lack of access to land and resources and things like that, participants almost always emphasized how difficult subsistence agriculture was on Guam. So the following recommendations seek to address those difficulties. They include community allotment gardens, small-scale edible landscapes, and selective planting and container gardens in rural communities. And I'll be able to go through each one in the next coming slides. And also nutrition education-based recommendations described by similar studies were actually found to be like already in use on Guam, and I'll address those later. So the first recommendation is the use of community allotment gardens, and they're a type of urban agriculture where parcels of land are tended to by individual households. So it's not like a community garden where several households within a community are tending to one big garden. These allotment gardens are managed by a household and given to them from either the government or a private entity. And the success of them really relies on regulation and administration. So that means that the regulations behind these garden allotments must be standardized for each household, and they must be guided by certain decisions from like a higher up. So naturally, these allotment gardens can lead to a sense of community empowerment due to like the joint advocacy and like household collaboration. The second recommendation is the use of small-scale edible landscapes in public spaces. Because they are small-scale, they would be easier to maintain and implement here on Guam. So they can be really simple, like perimeters of breadfruit and papaya trees to replace like the landscapes that are existing in many of the public spaces and kind of like government spaces, which are majority, if not all of them, like ornamental. So of course we would need regulations to not only promote like proper cultivation and management, but also to assure that these low resource households have controlled access to the produce. So the third recommendation is really for Gura to encourage selective planting within their communities, because government housing here on Guam is mostly limited by space. But if selective planting were to be done so in an organized manner, and if we were to focus on fruit trees, they would be able to provide both shade and fruit for the residents. Yeah. And if done so correctly, these fruit trees would also coincide with like community guidelines, so there wouldn't be like a clash of those guidelines set for those communities. Regulations, of course, would need to be put in place to ensure that the housing residents are the sole receivers of the fruit produced. And a similar recommendation that kind of goes under this theme is for both Section 8 housing and Gura communities to allow the use of container gardens besides each residence, because container gardens eliminate the need for land resources, so they wouldn't be limited by that. And although these containers wouldn't be great for growing fruit trees per se, other subsistence crops like taro and sweet potato could be easily cultivated in these. So just a couple notes on the nutrition education recommendations that we found in similar studies. We, through deep diving and research, well, it's not too deep because the promotion of these on Guam is doing very well, but a lot of these nutrition education recommendations are already implemented on Guam. So these similar studies that were done in the mainland emphasize that education and training is also important on how to reach food security. And this type of education includes like how to purchase cheaper foods or learning different recipes to maximize the amount of food that participants have on hand. And the University of Guam offers several community nutrition education programs that promote knowledge on these types of things like healthier meals and behaviors specifically for limited resource households. So one of those programs is the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, or FNEP, and it's USDA backed, and it promotes nutrition education. And another program is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Education, or SNAP-Ed, and it's the family education implement of the overall SNAP program. And it teaches food budgeting, meal planning, cost-effective shopping techniques, and other similar like nutrition-based strategies. So if anything, this study really supports the wider promotion and implementation of these programs. So of course, the final recommendation would be for further research and even expansion of this topic, because firstly, we use the USDA food insecurity survey in the first phase, right, to identify who is food insecure, but no further, analysis was done with that because it was just used as a filtering tool. But even with the preliminary results of that, it supports like similar findings reported in CHILL studies done on Guam, and CHILL is the Children's Healthy Living Program. Another recommendation would be to disseminate these findings to other sectors beyond sustainability and nutrition, like healthcare and early intervention. These findings could better reflect like education given to pregnant mothers on nutrition, just for an example. And this study could also very well be expanded to other communities residing on Guam and elsewhere, as the findings suggest a very heavy influence on traditional cultures on both the adaptive strategies to food insecurity and the feelings and experiences behind it and how they go about navigating this phenomenon. And not only that, it may also justify like food cost surveys that would address like award amounts for public lunch programs and food stamp benefits and things like that, because at least for Guam, it's been a while since these prices have been adjusted and given inflation and things like that. And finally, like in terms of what has been occurring now globally with the pandemic, these findings at the very least could be potentially used as like a baseline or like a kind of control of sorts for how food insecure communities operated pre-pandemic, because I know times have definitely changed, and I'm sure a lot of these strategies have either needed to be shifted a little or done in a different way, which is in itself an entirely different study. Because like times now, like definitely everything, almost every aspect of society and community is changing, and it'd be really interesting to take a look at that. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, everyone. Questions, I think? Not sure. Sophia?
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. That was super interesting. I really appreciate you coming on. I'd like to welcome all attendees to message their questions in the chat if they have any. During your presentation, I think everyone was just listening, so we didn't see any questions yet. But I guess until one comes in, I have a question, Hannah, and that is, what inspired you to look into this subject?
Oh, great question. I've been waiting for someone to ask me that. So on a personal level, when I started my graduate research, I really thought about what topic could I see myself, dedicating parts of myself to, either in the near future or, beyond, right, for the rest of my life. And my undergrad focused on environmentalism, but also like ethnic studies. So I was really interested on how the environmental meets like the society, the community, and where the disconnects were. And food insecurity is a big part of environmentalism, as well as like activism and things like that. So I knew I wanted to study that. And then when it came down to what population I wanted to study, I realized that the Chuukese community, makes up, I think, majority of the FSM migrant communities here on Guam, but they were like the one community that I knew the least about. And I really wanted to rectify that on like an education level, because, this type of research can really be expanded to, a broader audience. So it's kind of how I got here.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question from Danielle Yamagata. She asked, does Guam have any permanent plans or organizations that help support low-income families to provide a complete diet, besides what is provided by the government? And she says, by the way, awesome and informative presentation.
Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at what programs or organizations there are that are not government funded, right?
Yeah, it says, let's see, just like, yeah, does Guam have any permanent plans or organizations? Mm-hmm.
Organizations, as far as plans go, I'm not too sure on that. I feel like the pandemic really took, the spotlight for the issues that we were facing before, 2020 and beyond. I know I mentioned a couple of programs like the community nutrition programs that are offered at UOG. I know there are a couple of like religious or like church-based organizations that do reach out to these low resource community members and things like that. During the pandemic, I know there were a couple of restaurants that turned their, what's the word? Like not their plans, but how their operations, and they focused primarily on, these individuals who could no longer get food during this pandemic. And that's one of the things that the community was able to do, to come together to serve that. I know that's not actually a program or anything like that, but it is like, a community-based solution of sorts to this issue. So I hope I addressed the question.
Yeah. We have another question from Tahani Mafnas. Has anyone in the Chuukese community on Guam considered making a business to provide their food at affordable prices and sell it at, food or flea markets?
That's a great question. I think I posed that question to some of my participants as well, because many of them mentioned how it's at these like swap meets or these flea markets where the local Chuukese food is being sold at a higher price. And I think the barriers to getting this food at a cheaper price and being able to disseminate it among more of the community is the lack of tools. Because I know one of the specific local food that was discussed is it corn, I think, where you have to leave it underground for months, or you have to keep it contained for months, and you need like a certain tool, like a certain type of knife, or a tool to pound it, because it's like a pounded dish that in and of itself, being sold on Guam, is expensive to get. It's an expensive tool. So I think the question would be more would be like, why haven't the tools from Chuuk been transported to Guam yet? Does that make sense? I think it's just hard overall to achieve that like authentic, those are authentic Chuukese dishes in like the right way that would make people actually, want to eat it, and to give it its due respect.
Right. I wanted to actually ask a follow-up to a subject that you broached a little earlier, and it might be kind of outside the scope of this particular project, but I was wondering if you had any perspective on how the pandemic has affected some of these communities and some of these people who you interviewed as far as food insecurity.
So I did try to reach out to a couple of my participants, but it was a little hard given, current times. But to give a little context to this, there have been a lot of stories in the local paper here on Guam, and I'm sure abroad elsewhere, where it focuses primarily on USPS, right, the Postal Service. And this was also one of the ways where that barter system came into play, right, those coolers full of food and things like that. So I was able to get a hold of one of my participants and asked, like, I believe it was Sally, because she did the barter system. And I asked, like, has it been harder to do this, like given the Postal Service, or even like the lack of flights, because flights have decreased to a ridiculous number? And she just straight up said, yes, absolutely. It's so much harder, to get food out to their families, or get resources out to their families in their home islands. And also, getting those home cooked goods that, everyone deserves during stressful times. So that kind of adds a little bit more of like a personal like hit, like, oh, that's becoming a much more difficult process. In terms of like other strategies, like the government assistance, I know so many more families are now on those programs because of the pandemic, and there's just long lines at the supermarkets, which limits, or creates more like physical environmental barriers to obtaining food. There's been, types of foods that are now limited to the amount that you could buy, or just, you can't really find them on island. And then also, I know a lot of community members have, increased their like fishing, their fishing practices. And even at that, it's getting harder because you can't really leave your home as much as you wanted to, and have that freedom to obtain, foods in that matter.
And I know that you offered some recommendations, for ways to kind of mitigate some of these challenges, including these community gardens and the edible, what is the term? Like the
small scale edible landscapes?
Yeah. Would that work during like a challenge like this, like a pandemic?
Ooh, would it work? That's where the regulations would have to come into play. Because I think getting them off the ground wouldn't be the issue because you are dealing with, the environment, and it's, in the open air in the environment where it's safe. But just making sure that, one, it's these low resource households, that they're the ones that are given the access to, these landscapes, and making sure that they're able to do it in a safe, way that coincides with the restrictions that we have here on island currently. And just, I think that would be the biggest issue, is just making sure that they're able to have access to those, and that there would be potentially enough for, if not everyone, then mostly the ones that they're meant for.
Thank you. Well, we're getting towards the end of the hour here. If anyone would like to ask like a last question, feel free to submit it into the chat. And if not, Hannah, is there anything else that you'd like to add on this subject before we wrap up?
If anyone would like to expand this topic in the CNMI and you want info on how to get started, it doesn't have to be the Chuukese community within the CNMI, it could be any community. Reach out to me. I'd love to help out if anyone's interested on learning more about their communities, where they're at, within their own community.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you to everyone who took the time to tune in. A recorded version of this webinar will be available on the Humanities Council YouTube page, so keep an eye out for that, and we'll post it. Once we have that, we'll post it on Facebook. You will be sent a follow-up email that will offer the opportunity to give more feedback and fill out a survey. Please do fill that out. And don't forget to tune in to the 5 p.m. webinar today, and then, the 10 a.m. and 5 p.m.s for the rest of the month. So yeah, thanks again, Hannah, and happy Humanities Month.
Thanks, Masi. Thank you.